Your Honor, to aid in argument for the court, I'm going to be addressing the demur regarding count 1 RICO. And if the court has further questions on the lesser included of the 131, Mr. Abadi's going to address that. Mr. Floyd, if the court regarding the Rodriguez case, which was a case he handled on the demur on the street gang, if the court has more questions on that. And then Ms. Hilton would handle the remaining counts other than count 1. I just wanted to give the court that overview.
Thank you.
As the court's aware, Your Honor, the charge as alleged, the conspiracy, the state believes that there has been ample evidence that a rational juror could find that they conspired to commit at least a pattern of racketeering activity. And obviously, defense counsel has focused on the money or proceeds. The state believes that for purposes of directed verdict, the easier one to start with is, which is count 12 of the indictment, and the 3 criminal objectives as the court outlined in our proposed page 12 of the indictment, Your Honor.
All right.
That focus on murder, aggravated assault, acts of violence, as well as intimidation of law enforcement and witnesses, which is, I give them numbers in terms of the order of the bullet points. I believe that that's the easier argument or more efficient because there's...
Right. I mean, if the state has alleged 2 different ways of the defendants having violated RICO through a RICO conspiracy, and y'all only have to prove 1. You don't have to prove both.
Correct,
So
Your Honor.
you're saying there's at least evidence as to the overall purposes, Part B of RICO.
Correct, Your Honor. And a couple things is in terms of that objective of racketeering activity, specifically the murder and the aggravated assaults. You have, from the defendant's own words, and tattoos, their allegiance to YSL. I don't want to cite a litany of cases, but there's a number of factors that courts use to establish an enterprise. For example, United States v. Harris, 695 F. 3rd 1125 1136 is a 10th Circuit 2012 case, is display of colors. Jewelry, clothing, all of those are just 3 to start. You also have tattoos, which are permanent. And so Mr. Kendricks has slat on his left forearm and a large snake that was introduced, I believe yesterday or day before, on his stomach that goes up to his neck. You have defendant Stillwell, who has multiple admitted exhibits in post that reference slime or reference his, for example, Exhibit 430 VV is defendant Kendrick overt act 133 with a red bandana and a YSL pendant. State's Exhibit 511 VV, as admitted, is overt act 138, is defendant Kendrick with a hat with a rat crossed out on it. State's Exhibit 38 November is overt act 134, where you have Kendrick pointing at the cameraman, 2 individuals with Make America Slime Again. And I could go on, but the point being, you have both 2015 exhibits where Detective Gaither and Detective Dennis, you had Twitters of Mr. Sledge, you had Twitters of Mr. Zachary, Twitters of defendant Stillwell, where multiple, and I'll give a few examples that actively and openly possess my slimes, YSL, this is my brew. And that allegiance, coupled with the evidence at trial of the murder of Donovan Thomas to begin with, which captures overt acts 16 through 20, which the evidence of that murder from the interview statement of Kenneth Copeland on June 10th, 2015, and Quindarius Zachary on August 15th, 2015. Quindarius Zachary's interview, which was played for the jury and is in evidence, states that defendant Kendrick and Stillwell confessed to him that very night. And defendant Williams Condo, who rented the Hertz rental vehicle that the Infinity rep, Mr. Thomas Burnett, stated from watching the surveillance video, which I believe is 296 Yankee, that Detective Teague with APD introduced, that was an Infinity Q50. All of those things combined, that statement of Copeland and Zachary for the why, it is a criminal enterprise murder. There's no personal disagreement between Mr. Thomas, Mr. Kendrick, Mr. Stillwell. It is that rivalry of a criminal street gang that weaves through this case. And so in terms of commonalities, it is similar offenses, whether it's victims, the method and mode of operating. In this case specifically, you have a number of incidents that involve multiple YSL, self-identified or APD gang detective identified members committing acts of violence together. In Donovan Thomas, you have 4. In Shamel Drinks, you have 4, at least defendant Stillwell, Mr. Garlington in the white Audi, defendant Nichols and Miles Farley in the white Ford Fusion. On the April 28th, 2015, which was Deamonte and Garlington getting jumped at Club Crucial, there's a 911 call around 2 o'clock a.m. Fast forward, you have 2 shootings at 1903 Drew Drive and 1428 Adele. You had testimony from Ms. Bell, whose home was shot, crime scene technicians and responding officers, and you had in the interview and testimony of Zachary and Sledge that act in concert, which was only 3 months after the murder of Donovan Thomas, shooting at, intending to strike rival opposition members, the ABG, Inglewood family, YFN, that group. So from January 10th, 2015 to March 14th, 2022 of the murder of Shamel Drinks, the targeted acts of violence in concert by YSL members is towards the same opposition group. And that's significant for multiple reasons, because as the court knows in RICO, evidence can have multiple relevant purposes to both prove the criminal enterprise and also prove the pattern of racketeering. And I think what is important in this case is, although the state did not allege subsection alpha or bravo of the RICO statute, actual commission of racketeering activity gives clarity that this conspiracy was not some fanciful idea. It was actually alive and well. The best evidence of a conspiracy in a group is a decade's worth of similar victims, methods of operating, and public and active allegiance to this YSL enterprise afterwards that this case and the evidence through testimony and exhibits has established. So the courts, or the state, as a number of other factors, and I will not rattle off all of these cases that are other factors the court looks to an enterprise, gang and hand signs. There's been evidence admitted in testimony from APD gang detectives of the quintessential YSL hand sign, the wiping of the nose, greeting phrases the court has heard and seen in text messages and wiretaps, slat and slime.
Why don't you move on beyond enterprise to some of the other necessary elements?
Yes, Your Honor. So does the court have a specific necessary element that the court would like to hear?
Well, what were you going to talk about next?
Fair enough, Your Honor. So to give structure, moving on from the enterprise, when in terms of agreement or the defendants agreeing to be a part of this, the state's argument, and again, the evidence can have multiple relevant purposes, the tattoos and the public, both association with YSL members and active promotion through either of that criminal street gang through their own words or social media of showing allegiance to that, posting with YSL pennants, using the common gang identifiers and hand signs and with other YSL members throughout from 2015 to as recently as 2022 shows, and the commission of the racketeering activity shows that they were a part of it. As in, you do not need, of course, a written contract. You do not need, of course, some videotaped round table of discussion. Their actions speak louder than words. And so if you need to, there's ample evidence a rational juror could find that because of the commission of murder, aggravated assault, and continued association, that they have actively agreed to be a part of this enterprise through their very own actions. You also have October 1st, 2015, where Martinez Arnold gets jumped at Magic City by Kelvin Watts, Shell Kell, who of course has been talked about this week in relation to March of 2022, which shows a commonality. And then he calls Mr. Kendrick, who rides with him, where they get stopped with the multiple firearms in the Trestle Tree area, which there's been testimony from Detective Griffin, who was the lead detective on the Tierra Jones homicide. There's been detectives from multiple APD gang detectives about where Summerhill or ABG in that area is where their territory, so to speak. So that action, the January 10th, 2015 murder of Donovan Thomas, however many months later you get to October 1st alone, shows a commitment and an agreement by your very actions, willing to either assist or actively participate in racketeering activity. Furthermore, Your Honor, of course, I think the easiest of this, one overt act committed, and of course one committed within 5 years of the indictment. The state has, I will use because it's, I believe, one of the most readily assailant overt acts is the murder of Shamel Drinks, which the state believes through the testimony of Viverito, the social media introduced, is a rational juror of fact would find that to be street gang related, enterprise related. Again, there is no evidence of anything other than association with a rival gang that is in evidence of why Shamel Drinks would be murdered for going to pump up his car with gas. And so that act is certainly, it's only a few months before the indictment itself. That alone, the state believes there's been ample evidence that defendant Stillwell has committed that act along with other YSL members, and that alone a rational juror could find happened and was for, going back to page 12 of the indictment, one of the overlying purposes that the state has alleged, which is important, of preserving, protecting, and enhancing the reputation, power, and territory of the enterprise through acts of racketeering activity, including murder. When YSL members were murdered on March 11th, retaliation was needed for the enterprise's reputation and to exact vengeance. And so that overt act alone satisfies. Of course, there is ample overt acts alleged of promoting either the gang itself or violence. I didn't want to run off a litany of admitted exhibits with.
Okay, how about are you going to talk about what the pattern of interrelated racketeering activity within 4 years of?
So, Your Honor, yes. I will take the testimony that has came out related to YFN Lucci or Mr. Bennett, and that is a perfect example of, you have, when Mr. Sumlin testified and the call was presented of Christian Eppinger, who was in the jail, calling him saying, I'm on PC with that boy Lucci, how much can I get for that? Then you have the text messages that were the color-coded charts that Viverito walked through with Khalif Adams, Demekion Garlington, and Jaden Myrick. Then you have the video that from the jail where Jaden Myrick, after that messages about stabbing YFN Lucci, through the testimony of Viverito of what they were discussing, actively tried to stab YFN Lucci. Then you have the post of defendant Kendrick predating that, but 2019, I believe, standing on top of YFN Lucci's.
All right, but I mean, a post isn't an act of racketeering. So talk about.
Yes, Your Honor. So you have multiple YSL gang members, all of which, I use that example because I believe it's so salient, of multiple actors, multiple ages, multiple years in time. It's the same individual that they're trying to exact violence on, who happens to be the same individual who was very close with Donovan Thomas from 2015. All of those, that pattern, the victim and the method of operation, using other YSL gang members, create.
All right, so which acts of racketeering activity are interrelated that have to do with that?
Yes, Your Honor. So specifically, you have let me grab my indictment, Your Honor, so I can see.
Sure.
The accurate numbers. So in terms of overt act numbers, you have Act 171 as the Eppinger and Sumlin conspiracy to commit murder, which was the jail call, which has been introduced. You have overt acts 165 through 167 is Bobby Hunt, Khalif Adams, Demekion Garlington, Scarface, and Jaden Myrick, which is all related to that February 9th, 2022 attempted murder of Mr. Rayshawn Bennett. And you also have, this is not an overt act, but is quite relevant for this purpose, States Exhibit 227 VVB2 is the text message from defendant Stillwell's phone where he says on February 9th at 7:31 p.m., which is, I believe, within 30 minutes of that stabbing, they just wet Lucci's BITCH-ASS up, which again shows an us, a them, a concert, an agreement, a pattern, a method of utilizing contacts through jail, prison, or on the streets to concoct a plan and enact violence on a rival gang, specifically a rival gang leader, who, of course, on January 22nd, 2015 and January 26th, 2015, mother's house was shot at 1007 Hill Street. You also have the overt act that is in evidence related to the post from defendant Williams of, if I didn't like what you did for your kids and your mother, I would have been killed you, which was about Mr. Rayshawn Bennett, Wyeth, and Lucci. And so all of those things combined, without, you have words in the text messages through somewhat coded language. You have jail calls where Christian Adkins does mention his name, but you have where they all know what they're talking about, what the goal is. They don't need to go into the agreement and the enterprise's objectives morph into one and the same in terms of they don't even, they all have the same common goal of enacting violence on a rival opposition. Is the conspiracy that could be a possibility when I actively join this enterprise is best proven by the attempted murder, and the pattern of racketeering proves the conspiracy was alive and well, in this case for upwards of a decade. And all of those, of course, I use because they're more recent. They're well within the 5 years. Your Honor, I also believe that in terms of an overall pattern, when you have, of the 28 defendants indicted, there's many connections in terms of Rodelius Ryan was, I believe, 15 when the murder of Jamari Holmes happened. Roughly, the murder happened early that morning around 4 o'clock. Later on that day, he posted a video of, I bet YSL makes the news. He has Instagram messages that are in where he alleges is quite actively stating FUCKYFN, ABG, right? He would have been 11 years old when Donovan Thomas was murdered. When Wooney Lee testifies about, we put that, on your gravestone, he would have been much younger. He doesn't come up his name in the murder of Donovan Thomas, but the fact that members who either have, actively promoted, tattooed, claim allegiance to this enterprise of different ages, of different times, have the same enemy, the same disagreement through racketeering activity in its truest sense of violence, is the similarity, is certainly for a rational trier of fact to find that there is a clear, common, interwoven theme, which I use the violence because, again, I believe it's the most salient of this point for purposes of directed verdict.